Hello, my name is Erica Deneve. Today I'll be sharing my favorite poem from Clint Smith's book of poetry, Counting Descent. Clint Smith grew up in New Orleans, but got his undergraduate degree from Davidson, which is just 25 minutes from the house I grew up in. While this fact is what initially brought up my interest in Clint Smith, I was further intrigued by his inspiring work exploring and exposing the injustices and racial inequities of America's prison system. Smith has a PhD from Harvard and a prominent following on Twitter, and is constantly bringing light to the setbacks and experiences of Black people in this country. In this poem specifically, Clint Smith demonstrates his struggle with his identity and how he perceives the importance of identity in society. This is Queries of Unrest. Maybe I come from the gap between my father's teeth. Maybe I was meant to see a little bit of darkness every time he smiled. Maybe I was meant to understand that darkness magnifies the sight of joy. Maybe I come from where the sidewalk ends, or maybe I just read that in a book once. It can be hard to tell the difference sometimes. Maybe when I was a kid, a white boy told me I was marginalized, and all I can think of was the edge of a sheet of paper. How empty it is, the abyss I was told never to write into. Maybe I'm scared of writing another poem that makes people roll their eyes and say, "Another Black poem." Maybe I'm scared people won't think of the poem as a poem, but as a cry for help. Maybe the poem is a cry for help. Maybe I come from a place where people are always afraid of dying. Maybe that's just what I tell myself so I don't feel so alone in this body. Maybe there's a place where everyone is both in love with and running from their own skin. Maybe that place is here. Maybe that's why I'm always running from the things that love me. Maybe I'm trying to save them the time of burying darkness when all they have to do is close their eyes. This piece by Clint Smith contrasts dark and light in many ways, especially when he parallels childhood nostalgia and naivety with trauma and reality. I love how he emphasizes the confusion and loneliness he feels in his identity, and the anxiety portrayed by his constant ambiguity and the repetition of the word maybe. The title of this poem is perfect. He is both questioning and restless, almost lost in conversation with his own identity, his feelings, and how he thinks he should feel. He worries about others' perception of him as a Black poet, which causes him to overthink his own perception of his work. The final line of the poem is somber and self-sacrificing. He would rather protect others from the harshness of his reality than be vulnerable by sharing this identity with others. Sociologists like Mead and Goffman have formulated many theories about how our identities are shaped, how we perform them, and how they are perceived by society. Mead asked, "How does communication create this relationship between self and society?" This question relates both to Smith's relationship with his identity in society and also to my performance of Smith's work. Goffman concludes that the social self is a performance for others. For this performance, I had to minimize my presentation of my identity or social self in order to bring Clint Smith's feelings and identity to life. As a white woman performing about the internal conflicts of a Black man and his relationship with society, I had to imagine what it would be like to constantly perform this identity in real life, and how this identity is complicated and abused by racism and systemic discrimination. In order to sensitively and effectively portray this identity that is not my own, especially a race that has been marginalized and oppressed for centuries, I researched about performing as a different race in other forms of art and the common mistakes made in racist literature. In a 2017 article by Ryan Wong, he writes a syllabus for making work about race as a white artist in America. While this piece was directed more to painters than performers, I learned that the first requirement is understanding the psychological portrait of white shame and analyzing the whiteness in your life. Only by criticizing our own privileges can we better understand the vast differences in the socialized self and how they interact with others. Overall, by performing this piece, I learned a lot about my own socialized self and my experience with race as a white woman in America, which directly contrasted and related to the content of this piece. Clint Smith's anxieties and restlessness with his Black identity demonstrate the true vulnerability that comes from defining and performing an identity. Thank you.